when we're looking at new varieties, we might just go and grow 40 or 50 varieties with like 3 bed feet of each one with 6 or 8 plants in there. This is not a scientifically rigorous trial. There's no control. There's no multiple plantings to make sure that we can eliminate the site-specific conditions. But just a quick trial like this gives you an idea how the variety performs. Welcome to episode 78 of the Seed Farmer Podcast, the podcast where I want you to harvest seeds from some of the vegetables and flowers growing in your farm or garden, and then to plant that seed out to grow delicious vegetables and beautiful flowers. If you enjoy the Seed Farmer Podcast and find it to be a good resource that helps you improve your seed work and farming, please support the show at spreadsheet.farm/supportpodcast. I'm your host, Dan Brisebois, seed grower at Tourne-Sol Cooperative Farm and author of The Seed Farmer, a complete guide to growing, using, and selling your own seeds. Today's minisode is all about Bok Choy, or a lot about Bok Choy. But first, news. Or rather, first, a little joke. So, hey Molly.
Yes.
How much does a pirate charge for an ear of corn at the market?
An arm and a leg.
A buccaneer.
Ah.
Anyway, Emily didn't want me to tell you all this, but I've slipped it in anyway. So, all right, and onwards to more news. On Thursday, August 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, other times in between, is the next open house quarterly seed call. I've been telling you about these since they launched last December, so this is the third or maybe fourth of these quarterly calls. I can't believe the next one is coming already. This summer is just flying by. So this is an opportunity to come out and meet seed growers, seed people from different parts of North America and even the world. So the format that we've had for previous calls has been the first third is a round of seed dating where the call is broken up into groups of 2 or 3 people, and you have, I think, 6 or 7 minutes to meet somebody. There's a prompt to get the conversation going, and then you can just chat about seeds or whatever. And so I think there's 4 or 5 rounds of that in the first part of the call. And normally the second part is a presentation, but this time we're dedicating the full time to exchanging with each other. And so there'll be more intentional space to connect, exchange perspectives, and tend to the relationships that strengthen our shared seed movement. So these calls are really great, and they're free. Maybe I should mention that right away. There's a link in the show notes, and so you're welcome to come out and participate in this and meet some seedy people. And for a last piece of news, this has been a really wet July, unseasonably wet, and unpredictably wet. It feels like it's almost always raining. When we look at the forecast, it's always like 40 to 90% chance of rain. And we've had some pretty intense rains that just kind of appear, get a couple inches of rain, maybe some thunder. And it's made it very difficult to know how the week is going to roll out when we're planning a beginning of the week. Because usually, Sunday night, I'm trying to get a mental idea of the week, what I'm going to be doing. And then Monday morning, the veg team does their CSA harvest. And then at 1, kind of all the field teams, the seed and vegetable production, get together and we plan out the week. And right now, one of the things we're trying to make happen is harvest the garlic. We have a half acre of garlic that needs to come in. And we don't know what days it's going to rain or not because there's always these chance of precipitation. And sometimes it's perfectly sunny, even though it's supposed to be raining. And other days, suddenly it starts raining when it's not supposed to. Actually, the days where they say it's going to be sunny and hot, it has been sunny and hot. But it's just very few days that the weather report is committing to that. And so it's been a little bit of a puzzle figuring out how to do that. At the moment, we're on track with garlic despite that, though the last harvest we did, we weren't able to undercut it. We were just pulling the garlic out of the ground. The ground was so saturated and wet. And it being garlic harvest season has meant that seed harvest is the bottom of my priority list in terms of like planning time. And yet, the seeds are maturing on the plants and they want to come in. So normally we try to fit all our farm work in between Monday and Friday, get the week work well during that time. And then the weekend, we do other things. But this last Saturday has beautiful sunny weather. So, I got in at the farm early and I worked, up until about 1 or 1:30, just harvesting seeds to make sure I could get the lettuce in that was nice and fluffy, bring in some bok choy plants before they get drenched. Bringing in anything that was ready. I almost got to some radishes, and then actually it started to rain a little bit, and I didn't want to bring in wet plants, so I let them in the field, and hopefully I can squeeze them in between garlic harvests in the coming days. Anyway, it's tricky when you get seasons that are different than the way you usually expect them to be. Because normally at this time of year, if it rains, it'll rain for 2-3 days, and then it'll be just a lot of sun. And I'm not as worried about it. But this year, the last 2 or 3 years have actually been like this. So I don't like new normals, or not new wet normals. And that brings us to today's episode, which is about trialing varieties. And in this specific case, it's about trialing Bok Choy varieties. And that's actually one of the things I started my day off on Saturday. When I got to the farm, there was still quite a bit of dew, and it had rained the day before, so things were a bit wet. So I wasn't able to go in and touch dry seed crops, but I went to evaluate a heat-tolerant Bok Choy variety trial that I'm participating in. So this is something, the project is called CANOVI, the Canadian Organic Vegetable Improvement, and this is a collaboration between the Centre for Sustainable Food Systems at the University of British Columbia Farm and the Bauta Initiative project from SeedChange. So there's been a number of years that these CANOVI projects have been going on. I participated in a number of them. So the way the project works is there's a trial on a specific topic, and the organizers will send seed out to growers across Canada who've registered to be part of it. And so this year is about heat-tolerant Bok Choy varieties, and I received 7 green Bok Choys and 1 purple Bok Choy. And the main direction is to plant them in the field after the solstice, so June 21st. And we ultimately planted ours in the field, I think it's the 27th or the 29th. So we started those plants in the greenhouse 4 weeks before. So just at the beginning of June, we started the 8 varieties in the greenhouse in cell trays, and then we planted them out, I think it was June 29th. And there's a number of data points that we're asked to collect during this period. And the tool that is used to collect it is an online website that you enter your information at the end called SeedLinked, where the 8 varieties are there, and each of the data points that we're evaluating, there's a range that you can evaluate them on 1 to 5. And it actually has an app. And in the past, I didn't know there was an app, so I just recorded on paper, and then I got home later and put it on the desktop. But when I saw there was an app this year, and there may have been one before, but I just didn't notice, I installed it on my phone right away so I could do the evaluation straight from the field. So the first thing that's evaluated is how well it germinates, and that's evaluated a couple weeks after it's sown. You can see when the first true leaves are growing up, you can see the holes in your seedling trays. And so evaluating from, is there no germination or less than 50% to almost all of it germinated. And so that's the first thing we're evaluating. The next main thing is about 3 weeks after transplanting it, so 21 days or so, evaluating the bok choys for how they can be harvested at a baby size. And at this point, it was interesting to see, most of them looked pretty good at that point, but already there was one variety that was starting to bolt quite a bit. And at that point, I pulled out 90% of the plants, or even more than that. And so that didn't do too well on the baby size harvestability, and probably not going to do it well on any of the other ratings, considering I had pulled most of the plants out. But that's kind of the next main thing evaluated. And then the last thing to evaluate was when the plants are at full size for a full size bok choy. And so by then it's another couple weeks after that baby size. And the first thing we'd evaluated at that point was how much bolt resistance it has in hot weather. And some varieties hadn't bolted at all. A few more varieties had bolted a bit more. There was a second one that had mostly bolted at this point. And then evaluating how uniform they are, how marketable it is, and then just overall how we like this variety. So those are great questions and a great way to go through a trial. And I had a lot of fun. I like brassicas in general, and I like Bok Choy specifically. So it was really fun to look at 8 different varieties and see how they were doing. And that's when I was thinking about this episode and talking about it on this episode. And what's fun about participating in a trial like this is that it gives you an idea what a trial can be. Because in this case, I was growing 8 varieties, but I was growing about 10 plants of each variety. And we were growing 2 rows per bed, and I think we planted them at 6 or 9 inch spacing between plants in row. So each variety is taking less than 5 feet. So this was a trial that took about 35 or 40 feet in our field. And yet, at the end, it was clear which Bok Choys didn't meet that criteria and which ones did really well and which ones were in between. And then you can cut those Bok Choys, and all the ones that did good can go to market, or it can go into a CSA basket, or it can go into a stir fry. So it's interesting to see what size the trial needs to be. And, we've done trials like this for lettuces as part of a CANOVI, but also on our own. Like, when we're looking at new varieties, we might just go and grow 40 or 50 varieties with like 3 bed feet of each one with 6 or 8 plants in there. This is not a scientifically rigorous trial. There's no control. There's no multiple plantings to make sure that we can eliminate the site-specific conditions. But just a quick trial like this gives you an idea how the variety performs. And in this case, it's happening on farms across Canada, some in similar bioregions to mine and some in different bioregions. And so it gives a lot of data points to get a good idea what varieties might be working in different places without having to go too in-depth scientifically into the process. And it was interesting seeing the results. And here, I'm just speaking for myself, but the 2 varieties that really, really stood out, that were particularly uniform, and I say stand out, this is really at the adult phase. The 2 varieties were Bopak and Meching Choy, which are both F1 hybrids. And they were very uniform. They sized up really nicely. They had nice and thick stems, and they looked really good. And they were pretty tasty when I bit into the stems too, though that wasn't something that we were evaluating in this specific trial. And so it's interesting to see that the hybrid development has really put out some good varieties there. And that did create ultimately a kind of control of what a lot of market growers who are buying from commercial seed companies might expect out of a hybrid Bok Choy seed, and what they're comparing your seed, if you're growing open pollinated Bok Choy, to sell to your clients or maybe to share with other farmers. But there were some non-hybrid varieties that did particularly well. There was some Shanghai Green that did great, and there was one called Luck Dragon, which came from Adaptive Seeds. This was probably my favorite all through the trial. It really stood out at the baby size. It was kind of my number one at the baby size, but then it also competed. It was just maybe a little bit less big, and it came in, I guess, 3rd place for me after the 2 hybrids. And this is Bok Choy from Adaptive Seeds. And what's interesting about Luck Dragon come in number 3rd is it's actually was selected out of a hybrid. And I'm not sure if they crossed in another OP or if they just started with a hybrid and started selecting out. So it's exciting the potential that hybrids do offer us as open pollinated seed growers to also create new varieties from. And the Shanghai Green, this is one that's a traditional open pollinated variety. I mean, we also grow it on our farm, and it was fun to see how well it did. It was probably number 4 coming in after the other 3. Now, one thing that was interesting is I think might be the 2nd year of this trial, and I didn't participate in it last year, and I don't know if it was more regional, if I just didn't have the time, but I didn't participate in it last year. But I was looking at some of the results that were reported from last year, and it compares, at least the top 2, the Bok Choys were on top. But one of the ones that got mentioned last year, and I noticed, is the one that bolted almost immediately. This is a variety of bok choy called Canton White Stem. So it has like a deep purple, like spoon leaf, and a white stem. And when I was walking by the trial in the week before we actually evaluated it for baby harvest size, I was not loving looking at that plant. When we uncovered the row cover and sat down to look at all the plants, I got there and, it just looked horrible. So I pulled out all the bolted plants from it. And I guess out of 10 plants, I pulled 8 up. So it's 80%. I may have said 90 earlier, but 80%, that's the math. And so as a heat-resistant bok choy, this definitely failed. And that's what I saw in the results from the previous year. And it got voted as the one folks were least likely to try again. But the thing that I loved after pulling these 8 plants out were the 2 that were left were beautiful little bok choys. They were perfectly formed. They were really, really great little bok choys. And had they all looked like that, this probably would have been my number 1 for that trial. Now they didn't, right? So that's why it was number 8 in that specific moment and overall. But they were just so beautiful. And it occurred to me that this variety is probably not generally grown in the summer. It's being grown probably in the spring or the fall, where there isn't the same heat, and so it probably doesn't bolt the same way, and it probably performs better in those off-seasons. Now, I haven't actually grown it in those conditions, so I can't back that up, but that's just something that I assume the seed company that's offering it, they're offering it for a different climate than the middle of the summer, and we've had a couple of heat waves, so this is definitely, we're giving it heat, this trial. So that's my first thought, is that I'd love to see what this is like in the beginning and end of the season before the heat. But the second thing that I thought of is, well, there's a lot of potential to select this variety. So we grew 10 here, but what if I had grown 300 of these, and then maybe I could even grow them 3 or 4 inches apart, maybe even 2 inches, maybe not 2 inches apart, but maybe 3 inches apart, grow a bunch of them, pull out the early bolters, and then you have the perfect ones you can evaluate just to make sure that they're really great, and then let that go to seed, and then suddenly I have a variety that's been selected for more heat resistance. And I would bet you that the following year, it's going to have many less plants going to seed. And within 3 generations, I wouldn't be surprised that you wind up with something much more heat resistant. So that's something that was also exciting. Now, I'm not sure I'm going to do work on this specific variety that way, but it's nice to dream of all the projects that I could do on the farm. So thinking about this Canton White Stem Bok Choy and how it relates to all these other varieties, I know that we're in the middle of the summer and you're not about to start a trial right now. If you're doing trials, you've already decided to do them, you've set them up, because I'm sure your brain is jelly with the heat and balancing the rain versus the dry and all the things you need to do, perhaps the garlic you got to bring in. But this is something to seed the idea for you for this fall when you're planning out next year. Is there something that you'd like to trial, especially of a quick growing crop, and you want to grow a bunch of different varieties of that crop, and it doesn't need to take a lot of space? And this is a sneak peek of what that can look like. And that's another minisode of the Seed Farmer Podcast. If you've done any exciting trials you want to tell me about this summer, please let me know. Thank you to Safiya Sideltin for the theme music. You can hear more of their music at safiyasideltin.com. Thank you to Molly Breezebois for editing this episode. And too bad you didn't guess Buccaneer. And thank you so much for listening. You can find more seed growing resources on my blog at seedgrowers.farm. While you're there, you can subscribe to my newsletter full of seed growing, crop planning, and farm spreadsheets. You can also find out where to order a copy of my book, The Seed Farmer, a complete guide to growing, using, and selling your own seed. And you can support the show at spreadsheet.farm/supportpodcast. If you haven't already subscribed, now's the time. You wouldn't want to miss the next episode. Until then, happy farming.